It is November 16, 1938. In the laboratories of the Swiss pharmaceutical company Sandoz in Basel, 32-year-old chemist Albert Hofmann is researching possible stimulants for the blood circulation. In the process, he manages to isolate a chemical called lysergic acid diethylamide. This is an alkaloid contained in ergot, a parasitic fungus that is most common on rye ears. Hofmann names this alkaloid after the German name of the compound LSD and adds the number 25 to it. It is the 25th compound of this group that he has isolated, and that is exactly how it is treated. For the next 5 years, its effects are not investigated further. Then, in 1943, chance intervenes, turning Hofmann's compound into one of the greatest modern phenomena, and bringing him recognition and popularity that his colleagues in the field could only dream of. Hofmann was born in 1906 in Baden in northern Switzerland. He came from a very poor family and spent all his days outdoors, surrounded by the beautiful countryside. Later he wrote that he once had an epiphany. The nearby forest, the morning sunlight, and the singing of birds were suddenly transformed into a radiant perception that filled him with an infinite sense of joy, understanding, and security. This experience is said to be one of the reasons why he became interested in chemistry, as the science best able to describe the wondrous processes taking place in the human brain. At the age of 23, he received doctorate in chemistry from the University of Zurich, and immediately afterwards joined the Sandoz laboratories. Here he worked on research on ergot alkaloids. We're moving to 1943. Hofmann is by then a happy father of a family, and his LSD, discovered 5 years earlier, has been put to bed so far. He then decides to use it in some further experiments, and in the process inadvertently, probably through his fingers, gets a microscopic dose into his bloodstream. To his amazement, he develops similar sensations to those he experienced as a child. A shocking finding given the negligible amount of the substance. 3 days later, in the company of his assistant, he knowingly ingests a dose of 1/4 milligram of LSD. As he later says, "It seemed so little that I didn't actually expect any effect." But he was wrong. The effect of the drug was overwhelming. Hofmann is said to have experienced a range of sensations from sheer bliss and a sense of being at one with the universe, to anxious hallucinations and fear for his life. His bicycle ride home through this fantasy world is now a legendary pop culture story. It was the first trip on LSD in history. Today we know that the dose was not small. At the time, however, no one could have imagined such an enormous effect coming from such a small amount of a substance. The only hallucinogen scientifically described at the time was mescaline, and Hofmann came to an incredible conclusion. His LSD was 5 to 10,000 times stronger. It's the 50s, the Cold War, and the military on both sides of the Iron Curtain is becoming interested in LSD. The idea of decimating enemies without killing them and causing massive damage is appealing, as is the idea of interrogating intoxicated prisoners. But experiments will show it's a dead end. Interrogations of intoxicated people are worthless. LSD is not addictive. Intoxicated soldiers could be dangerous to their own troop too. For example, an orderly marching platoon of the US Army behaves like this while under the influence of LSD. Even more comical is a similar experiment performed by the staff of army in Czechoslovakia. This is what happens when you try to plan a military operation on a trip.
Opakujte! A to mám! To svíč! Municí
And so, logically, the next stage comes. LSD, still perfectly legal, will reach the ordinary people. Its main promoter will be Harvard University psychologist Timothy Leary. If Hofmann is called the father of LSD, then Leary was its prophet. First at the university and later, when he was fired for unethical practices, at the Millbrook estate near New York, where he held seances with psychotropic drugs and promoted their mass use. These psychedelic experiences, states where you are intoxicated by a drug and find yourself in a world of pleasurable sensations, were, he believed, the right way to create a better community. His philosophy was brief.
6 words. Turn on, tune in, rock out.
This is exactly what fit the hippie movement that emerged in America in the 60s as a reaction to the state of society and the Vietnam War. Freedom, free love, redirecting the mind into another dimension with the help of drugs. This was their way of life. And LSD played an important role in it. No wonder LSD was outlawed in the United States in 1966. The hippie community switched to illegal production, managing to create their own derivative with the same effects, called orange sunshine. Then during the next summer, when a huge wave of young people across America headed to the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco to pursue their ideals, it was the final nail in the coffin. Within a few weeks, 100,000 new residents arrived, often living on the streets or in parks, and LSD was used by virtually everyone. At first it was tolerated, but with so many people it was simply impossible to keep control of the bad trips. Drugs began to disintegrate the community from within. Politicians sharpened their campaign against LSD, which was discrediting the entire hippie movement. President Nixon named Leary the most dangerous man in America, and shortly thereafter Leary was sentenced to a draconian 20-year prison term for possession of 2 marijuana joints. The final death knell rang for LSD in 1971, when the production and use of LSD was outlawed worldwide. But beware, there was one exception. It might be surprising, but it was socialist Czechoslovakia. Here, experiments with LSD had a rich history, even being produced by the national company Spofa under the name lysergic. Psychiatrist Stanislav Grof, who for many years conducted experiments with LSD and who emigrated to the United States in '67, is still considered one of the world's foremost experts on the effects of the drug. He summed up his experience. LSD affects everyone differently. It doesn't create experiences and visions, but pulls them out of the deep unconscious.
With this kind of understanding, LSD becomes comparable to what the microscope is for biology or medicine, or what the telescope is for astronomy.
But back to Albert Hofmann again. After the discovery of LSD, he had a long and colorful life ahead of him. In 1958, he succeeded in extracting and later synthetically producing psychotropic substances from leucostrife, a fungus that had been discovered the year before, but had been used ritually by Mexican Indians for centuries. On his trip to Mexico, during a legendary seance, the local shaman confirmed that Hofmann's man-made substance had the same effects as the sponges themselves. Hofmann himself, however, never supported the mass use of the drugs he discovered. He blamed Leary for imposing them on the very young, whose development and minds were not yet mature enough for it. And this is a personal confession he made shortly before his 100th birthday.
Das größte Geschenk des Schöpfers an die Menschen, dass er ein Bewusstsein hat, eben, dass er seiner Schöpfung bewusst wird. Dass wir seiner Schöpfung bewusst werden, dass wir nicht einfach blind durch das Paradies gehen.